Her eyes, never those of a child, were pure white and empty, staring as if she could turn our very souls inside out. When I look back to my childhood, I remember a time when our home was filled with love, laughter, and togetherness. We lived in a joint family, my uncles, aunts, cousins, and grandparents, all under the same roof. Life was simple, and in that simplicity, we found joy. Every evening, the courtyard echoed with chatter, children's laughter, and the warmth of family bonds. But destiny had its own plan. Among my relatives, one of my aunts carried a silent sorrow. She had no children of her own. Despite years of prayers and countless remedies, she remained childless. The absence of a child left her heart heavy, and often I would see her sitting alone, lost in thought, her eyes filled with longing. Then one day, everything changed. After months of persuasion, she decided to adopt a child from an orphanage in a nearby town. I still remember the day she returned with a little girl. The girl's age was around 12 or 13, fragile in appearance, but with a striking aura that none of us could ignore. My aunt introduced her to everyone and said with a trembling smile, "Her name will be Isabella." At first glance, Isabella seemed ordinary. Her pale skin, long dark hair, and quiet demeanor didn't raise any questions. Yet, behind her silence, there was something unusual in her gaze. Her eyes were deep, too deep for a child of her age, like they carried secrets that were far older than her small frame. The family welcomed her warmly. My aunt, finally relieved of her loneliness, held Isabella close to her heart, as if she had been waiting for her all her life. That night, the entire household celebrated. There was laughter, sweets, and blessings for the newly arrived child. But even in the middle of all that happiness, I remember catching a glimpse of Isabella standing quietly in a corner. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't laughing. Her expression was blank, and her eyes seemed to be scanning each of us one by one, as if she was measuring us, as if she already knew something we didn't. At the time, I brushed it aside. After all, she was just a new child in a strange home. Of course, she would take time to adjust. But if only we had realized her arrival was not the beginning of happiness. It was the beginning of something dark, something none of us were prepared to face. The first few days after Isabella's arrival passed without incident. My aunt glowed with joy, finally fulfilled as a mother. She dressed Isabella in new clothes, braided her hair, and showed her off proudly to visiting relatives. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But beneath that surface, tiny cracks began to appear. It started in the most ordinary ways. My cousins, who once played together from dawn till dusk, suddenly became irritable. Small arguments turned into loud quarrels. Simple conversations turned into heated disputes. Where there had once been laughter, there was now silence, or worse, tension. At first, we thought it was coincidence. After all, in a big family, disagreements happen. But soon, the pattern became clear. Whomever Isabella spent time with began to change. My usually cheerful cousin stopped eating properly and stayed locked in his room for hours. Another, once patient and kind, snapped at everyone for the smallest mistakes. Even the adults weren't spared. My uncles argued constantly about trivial matters, and my grandmother, once the calmest of all, became restless and uneasy. And through it all, Isabella remained the same, silent, watchful, almost detached. She never raised her voice, never cried, never misbehaved. Instead, she would sit quietly in the corner of a room, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes fixed on whoever was speaking. Those eyes, they had a strange weight, as though they could peel back the layers of your soul and expose something you didn't even know was there. I remember one evening vividly. The whole family had gathered in the courtyard for dinner. Tension hung thick in the air. Nobody spoke much. Isabella sat beside my aunt, eating slowly, her gaze drifting across each face around the circle. When her eyes met mine, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. It was as if she wasn't just looking at me, but looking through me. That night, as I lay in bed, I overheard my parents whispering in the next room. "Something is wrong in this house," my father said. "Since the girl came, nothing feels the same. Everyone's changed. Can't you see it?" My mother hushed him, reminding him that Isabella was just a child. But in her voice, I sensed doubt. The changes were too real to ignore. The harmony of our home had shattered, replaced by unease that grew stronger every day. And somewhere deep inside, I began to fear that Isabella wasn't just a child trying to adjust to a new home. She was something else. Something that carried a shadow with her, one that was slowly spreading through every corner of our lives. The tension in our home grew heavier with each passing day. It was no longer just arguments or foul moods, something far more dangerous was creeping in. It began one late afternoon. My cousin, barely a year older than me, was sitting outside in the courtyard with Isabella. They seemed to be having a quiet conversation. From a distance, it looked harmless, almost peaceful. But then, without warning, he stood up, his face blank, and walked toward the pond at the edge of our house. At first, we thought nothing of it. Maybe he wanted to wash his face or fetch some water. But then, he climbed straight onto the edge and jumped in. The sound of the splash shattered the silence. For a few moments, we froze. None of us could believe what we had just seen. My cousin couldn't swim. We all knew that. Panic erupted. Everyone rushed toward the pond, screaming his name. My uncles leapt into the water, struggling to drag him out. When they finally pulled him ashore, his face was pale, his eyes half open, his body trembling. We thought we had lost him. When he finally coughed up water and caught his breath, we asked him what had happened. His lips quivered as he whispered, I don't know. I was just sitting with Isabella, and then, I don't remember. I felt something pulling me, and then, nothing. The family tried to dismiss it as shock, but deep inside, we all knew this was no accident. The growing fear. After that day, a strange dread clung to our home like a suffocating fog. Every time someone sat too long with Isabella, something seemed to happen. A cousin would fall sick without reason. An uncle would lose his temper and smash things. My aunt, once so full of life, after Isabella's arrival, grew pale and exhausted, as if drained by an invisible force. The house itself felt different. Shadows seemed thicker in the corners. The nights grew unnaturally silent, as if the very air was holding its breath. And Isabella, she remained untouched by it all, quiet and watchful, her expression never changing. One evening, as I passed by her room, I saw her sitting alone by the window. She wasn't reading, or playing, or even looking outside. She was just sitting there, her lips moving ever so slightly, as if she was whispering to someone unseen. I leaned closer, trying to catch the words, but the moment I did, her head turned sharply, and her blank eyes locked onto mine. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. There was nothing in her expression, no smile, no frown, just emptiness. And yet, that emptiness was more terrifying than anger. The first death. The final blow came soon after. My cousin's sister, a bright and cheerful girl, had been spending more time with Isabella than anyone else. She would sit with her late into the evenings, whispering, giggling, as though sharing secrets. We were relieved, thinking perhaps Isabella was finally opening up. But that relief didn't last. One night, the house woke to screams. We rushed to her room, only to find the door locked from inside. When my uncles broke it open, what we saw froze our blood. My cousin's sister was hanging from the ceiling. Her face was pale, her eyes wide open in terror, as though she had seen something unimaginable in her final moments. The whole family broke down in grief. My aunt fainted, my grandmother wailed, and even the strongest of my uncles couldn't hold back their tears. But amidst all the chaos, one thing stood out. Isabella was there, standing silently in the corner of the room. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shocked, she was simply watching, her head slightly tilted, her eyes fixed on the body, as though she had been expecting this all along. From that night onward, the house was never the same. The shadow of death had entered with Isabella, and we all knew this was only the beginning. The death of my cousin shattered our family. Grief swallowed the house, but alongside grief came something else: fear. A heavy, unshakable dread lingered in every corner, like an unseen predator waiting in the shadows. Whispers filled the nights. The elders debated whether Isabella was cursed, or perhaps carrying some unknown evil with her. My aunt, though devastated, refused to let go of the girl she had claimed as her daughter. She clung to Isabella with desperate affection, as though sending her away would mean losing the only child she had ever known. but the rest of us knew something was wrong, terribly wrong. The night begins. It was a few nights after my cousin's death. The air felt unusually heavy, and a strange silence gripped the house. Even the crickets outside seemed to have gone mute. We gathered inside early, shutting all doors and windows, as though instinctively trying to keep something out. Midnight came. The lamps flickered, casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. I was lying awake, unable to sleep, when it began. A sound, faint at first, then louder. A laugh, but not a normal laugh, no. This was something unnatural, something that didn't belong to a human throat. It was high-pitched and guttural at the same time, twisting and bending like 100 voices tangled together. It echoed down the hallway, chilling the blood in our veins. We froze. Everyone heard it. The sound was coming from Isabella's room. The horrifying sight. Gathering courage, the family rushed to her door. My uncle pushed it open, and what we saw inside haunts me to this very day. The room had transformed. It no longer looked like the neat, freshly decorated space my aunt had prepared. Instead, it was coated in thick dust, as though it had been abandoned for decades. Cobwebs stretched across the ceiling and corners, glistening in the dim light like twisted veins. The smell was suffocating, damp, rotten, and ancient. And there, in the middle of the room, stood Isabella. Her eyes, once dark and deep, were now completely white, glowing faintly in the dark. Her hair lifted and swayed as though caught in a wind, though the air in the room was still. Her body trembled with laughter inhuman, echoing, endless. We stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. It was as if our very souls were caught in her gaze. My aunt screamed her name, but Isabella didn't respond. She only laughed louder, tilting her head back, her pale throat quivering with every monstrous sound. And then her eyes fell on us. That instant, the laughter stopped. Silence. Thick, unnatural silence. One by one, she looked at us, her white eyes piercing through the dark. It felt like invisible chains wrapped around my chest, dragging the air out of my lungs. I couldn't move. None of us could. We were trapped in her presence, helpless before the thing that were the face of a child. The escape me uncle slammed the door shut, and we stumbled backward, gasping for air. My grandmother clutched her chest, nearly collapsing, while others cried and prayed in desperation. Inside the room, the laughter started again, louder than before, shaking the very walls of the house. We huddled together, terrified, as though the sound itself would shatter us. At last, my father shouted, "We must get rid of her. She cannot stay here another night." Everyone agreed. The decision was made in trembling voices. We would call the orphanage at dawn and beg them to take Isabella back. But none of us truly believed it would be that simple. That night, none of us slept. The laughter from Isabella's room went on for hours, sometimes loud, sometimes faint, but never ceasing. Each echo carved itself into our minds, leaving us haunted long after the sound died down. And deep inside, we knew Isabella was no ordinary child. She was something else, something that had chosen our home, and was only now beginning to show its true face. The next morning, our family gathered in hushed fear, exhausted from a night filled with impossible sounds. Isabella's laughter haunted every corner of the house, and no one dared to enter her room. My aunt refused to believe anything was wrong. She insisted Isabella was just lonely and frightened. But we knew better. Something about Isabella wasn't human. The call to the orphanage. Early that day, we decided to call the orphanage the place my aunt claimed she had adopted Isabella from. With trembling hands, my uncle dialed the number. A woman answered, polite, but puzzled. "Yes, may I help you?" she asked. My uncle's voice shook. We adopted a child from you, Isabella. Does that name sound familiar?" There was a long pause. Then, softly, the woman replied, "No, we did not place any child with your family. No, Isabella has been adopted from here." The room went silent. Our hearts stopped. My aunt's face went pale. If she hadn't come from the orphanage, where had Isabella come from? The Kabirai's advice. In desperation, my family turned to a local Kabirai, a traditional healer, hoping for answers. He arrived late that afternoon, carrying an assortment of herbs, talismans, and a serious expression that immediately silenced everyone. He examined the room and immediately shook his head. "This child," he said slowly, "not possessed in the usual sense. She is something else entirely, something ancient, a being that chooses her host carefully." We listened, horrified. He explained that Isabella had likely planned to enter our lives long before we even met her. She had woven herself into our family's routines, our relationships, and our bonds. And through this, she began to exert influence, slowly and silently, over everyone she came in contact with. "The child your aunt brought into the house," the Kabiri continued, "is no ordinary child. She is a being that thrives on chaos, fear, and death. She does not age like a normal human, and she can vanish from any space as easily as shadows vanish at sunrise." We felt a cold weight in our hearts. All the changes in our family, the quarrels, the accidents, the tragedies, were no coincidence. Isabella was orchestrating them, step by step. The disappearance. After hours of preparations and rituals, we returned to her room, hoping to confront her, or at least see her as a human child once again, but the room was empty. Nothing. No furniture displaced. No footprints. No Isabella. We searched every corner. The Kabiri checked every angle, muttering charms and prayers, but it was futile. There was only one door, and yet, somehow, she was gone. The Kabiri finally spoke, grim. "Do not seek her in ordinary ways. She is not a child, not a spirit you can trap. She will return when she chooses, and until then, she watches, she waits, and if the family is not cautious, she will strike again." A frightful warning. After that, the Kabiri imposed strict rules for the household. We were to never enter certain rooms alone. We were to avoid certain hours of the night. We were to maintain silence in specific areas of the house. Most importantly, no one was to attempt to summon or call out to Isabella, for even speaking her name could draw her attention. My aunt, devastated yet stubborn, reluctantly agreed, but the rest of us lived in constant vigilance, our lives forever shadowed by the memory of a child who wasn't a child, who had come into our home and left fear in her wake. Even today, when the night is quiet, I sometimes hear a faint giggle, distant but unmistakable, and my heart tightens, remembering that Isabella is always watching. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and yet the shadow of Isabella never left our home. Life continued outwardly, but the air always carried a tension we could never shake. No one laughed freely, no one walked through the halls without caution, and every creaking sound at night made our hearts race. My aunt clung to hope, convinced Isabella was simply a lost child in need of care, but the rest of us knew better. The rules we lived by. The Kabiri's instructions became law in our household. No one could enter Isabella's room alone. Certain hours of the night were strictly off limits. Objects, doors, and windows had to be secured in very particular ways, and under no circumstances were we to speak her name casually. We obeyed, not out of respect, but out of sheer terror. Every violation, even a small one, felt like inviting disaster. Even so, small disturbances continued. Objects moved inexplicably. Shadows seemed to flicker where no light should reach. Sometimes, faint whispers or giggles would echo through empty rooms, chilling us to the bone. It became painfully clear. Isabella's presence had permanently altered our home. She could vanish, reappear, and act in ways beyond human understanding. The night of the last encounter. One night, years after her arrival and the first horrors, something even more terrifying happened. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses down on your chest. Suddenly, we heard a voice, a whisper, soft but unmistakable. It came from Isabella's abandoned room. "Why did you try to stop me?" We froze. No one had been near the room. The Kabiri had warned us that speaking to her, or even hearing her voice, could draw her attention, but the sound had found us anyway. We gathered cautiously at the doorway, peering inside. The room was empty, but the temperature had dropped drastically. Our breaths formed clouds in the air. Dust swirled in shapes that almost resembled a figure, and a faint, cold laughter echoed behind us, though no one was there. It was then that we realized Isabella never really left. She was always present, always watching, always waiting, and no locks, no doors, no rules could fully keep her out. The final warning. The Kabir told us that some entities are not bound by the natural world. Isabella was one of them, a being that thrives on fear, disruption, and death. He warned us. She will return when she chooses. Your family may never see her face again, but her presence will linger in your lives, in your shadows, in the moments you feel suddenly cold or uneasy. Remember this, she is patient, and she does not forgive. And so, we lived our lives cautiously, carrying the memory of a girl who was never just a girl. Even now, long after she disappeared from sight, I sometimes hear the faintest giggle in the stillness of the night. A giggle that reminds me, with chilling certainty, that Isabella is still out there watching, waiting, and biding her time. The house is no longer a home in the way it once was. It is a reminder, a warning, a haunted legacy of a child who was never a child at all. And that is the story of Isabella the orphan who was more than she seemed, and the shadow she cast over our family, a shadow that will never fully lift. Did you enjoy the story? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Horror Dream. Want more stories like this? Subscribe to The Horror Dream, and we'll bring you more darkness, just for you. If you enjoy a little chill down your spine, stick around, like, share, and hit that subscribe button, right here on The Horror Dream. Your support keeps us going, so stay with us. Subscribe to The Horror Dream for more spine-tingling tales.